Hello everyone, and welcome to Primetime. Here's the top story today. In a federal courtroom in New York, for the first time I'm face to face with Mike Jeffries, the multi-millionaire ex-fashion boss I've spent 3 years investigating for the BBC. He stares at me directly, lips pursed and chin raised, as he sits before the judge. As a result of my reporting, he was arrested this week by the FBI and charged with running an international sex trafficking and prostitution business, along with his British partner, Matthew Smith, and their middleman, James Jacobson. Authorities acted after hearing my podcast series, The Abercrombie Guys, in which I unearthed evidence that Mr. Jeffries, 80, and Mr. Smith, 61, had been at the center of a sophisticated global operation involving a network of recruiters and a middleman scouting young men for sex. As CEO of teen retailer Abercrombie & Fitch, Mike Jeffries was described to me as an eccentric and superstitious genius who, with his highlighted hair and penchant for flip-flops and plastic surgery, personified the youthful, all-American brand he created. But now, his hair white, his fillers dissolved, and wearing an ankle monitor, he seemed a shadow of the mogul said to have used his power and strength, while in charge, to abuse vulnerable models. US prosecutors say he and the others accused used force, fraud, and coercion to make men engage in violent and exploitative sex acts from at least 2008 to 2015. If convicted, they face a maximum of life in prison. Shoulders slouched, Mr. Jeffries' face was blank as his lawyer entered his plea of not guilty. His life partner, Matthew Smith, a UK citizen, is yet to appear in court. He's considered a flight risk by authorities and is currently detained until trial. When I think back to how my own investigation began, in January 2021, I never imagined it would lead to this moment. During the pandemic, I was researching the fashion industry when I stumbled across a cryptic Instagram comment written by a former model named Barrett Paul. He was part of a group discussing how they felt abuse against male models was being ignored. "We've seen it happen with Me Too. How about us too?" one wrote. We soon got on the phone. After an hour of talking, he said he felt he could trust with me a secret he'd never really shared before. "It's probably like the darkest experience I've ever dealt with," he told me. "They had someone come and shave me, like my whole body, because that's how they like the boys." In 2011, then aged 22, Barrett said he'd been referred by an older model, who was a close friend, to meet a mysterious middleman he described as having a missing nose, covered with a snakeskin patch. He said this man, who I later identified through phone and property records as James Jacobson, had made him perform a sex act as a tryout before sending him to Mike Jeffries, then CEO and chairman of Abercrombie & Fitch, and his British partner. Barrett claimed that, for years, the duo had been throwing elaborate sex events at their palatial home in the Hamptons. He said the one he had attended was facilitated by chaperones in Abercrombie polos and flip-flops, carrying silver platters of alcohol, poppers, and lube. What Barrett told me sparked my initial 2-year investigation. I traveled across America, from the suburbs of Ohio to the desert of Palm Springs, tracking down men affected and confronting those involved, including the middleman himself. Usually when I'm investigating, I can find a few loose threads to pull at by searching newspaper archives, court records, or social media. But there was absolutely nothing in the public domain about these allegations. So I took an old-school approach, piecing together my own trail through word of mouth, knocking on doors, and sending handwritten letters to potential sources. I traced and contacted hundreds of people, including former Abercrombie & Fitch models and Mr. Jeffries' ex-household staff, earning trust over months. Then, a massive breakthrough. Barrett Paul had an old iPad that wouldn't turn on, but we got it fixed. Through that, I obtained an itinerary and flight ticket corroborating the event he attended in the Hamptons. It was sent by the middleman James Jacobson and contained some first names and numbers of others involved. I later recovered more than a dozen of these itineraries from different sources, finally giving me concrete leads. But it took me months to figure out their roles, not wanting to tip the wrong person off while I was still in evidence-gathering mode. Many men were wary of speaking. 2 accused me of being a spy for Mike Jeffries, initially fearful of his money and clout. I, too, became increasingly paranoid after I began facing hundreds of hacking attempts each day from unknown IP addresses. We were right to be cautious. In their indictment, unsealed on Tuesday, prosecutors said Mike Jeffries had employed a full-service security company to oversee non-disclosure agreements, NDA, conduct background checks, and surveil and intimidate anyone who threatened to expose them. I have since spoken with more than 20 men who attended or helped organize these events for Mr. Jeffries and his partner Matthew Smith. Some, like Luke, an aspiring model who told me he was recruited under the guise of attending an A&F photo shoot, said they had been misled and not told sex was involved. How did this operation stay hidden for so long? The answer I reached was that the shame some men felt talking about same-sex abuse had silenced them as effectively as any NDA. Some told me they had felt suicidal, others completely broken. In many instances, I was the first person they had confided in. One man, who I'm calling Alex, broke down as he told me he believed he was drugged and raped by an unknown assailant at an opulent event hosted in Marrakesh, for which dozens of men had been flown in. He believed this led to him contracting HIV. Jeffries was the kingpin, he told me at the time. Without him, none of this could have happened. Ahead of publication, I worked with BBC Panorama to meticulously fact-check my evidence. This involved speaking with those inside the operation, including James Jacobson. When podcast producer Ruth Evans and I knocked on his door one sweltering day in rural Wisconsin in August 2023, he sank onto his steps, put his head in his hands and swore. He asked me for a deal. "Leave my name out, and I'll tell you everything," he said. Mr. Jacobson repeated this request dozens of times the following day when he agreed to meet for coffee. We spoke for 2 hours. At times it was bizarre. He admired my shorthand, commented on my British accent, and seemed to patronize me, calling me sweetheart. He's a former actor and at one point put on a bunch of accents and pretended to wear a cloak, trying to convince me he could do an anonymous interview. But he was charismatic too, and joked about his missing nose, saying the only job he could get these days was as a Bond villain. Eventually, Mr. Jacobson said he was just doing his job and hadn't spoken to Mr. Jeffries or Mr. Smith since 2015. Ultimately, he didn't get his deal, and in court, he again sat with his head in his hands as his lawyer entered a plea of not guilty. After we published in October 2023, some of the men in this story took legal action against Mike Jeffries, Matthew Smith, and Abercrombie & Fitch, who they are suing for rape, assault, and sex trafficking. All deny wrongdoing. The lawsuit claims it's likely that more than 100 men were abused during Mr. Jeffries' tenure. Sources also began contacting me to say they had been approached by law enforcement. We were not involved in the FBI's investigation, which was totally independent of mine. Protecting sources is integral to my work, so it would be the men's decision to talk. Looking back, there were moments I considered giving up. I initially faced dead end after dead end, but the more I heard, the more I felt a duty to bring this to light for the first time and hold those involved to account. More than 2 years on from our first conversation, I asked Barrett Paul why he decided to speak to me. He started crying and said, "My gut said trust her. Tell her your story, and maybe, just maybe, someone will listen." Announcing the charges, U.S. Attorney Breon Peace said, "To anyone who thinks they can exploit and coerce others by using the so-called casting couch system, this case should serve as a warning. Prepare to trade that couch for a bed in federal prison."
He was an incurable romantic, the boy who lived a secret life in World of Warcraft. In new documentary, The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, a Norwegian couple talks about the rich experiences their disabled son had online in the World of Warcraft game, without their knowledge. When Mats Steen died at the age of 25 in 2014 from a degenerative muscular disease, his parents, Robert and Trude Steen, were surprised to be contacted at their home in Norway by people from all over Europe, mourning his loss. The Steens knew that their son was an avid gamer, but they'd not grasped that for nearly a decade he had had another virtual life in the game World of Warcraft. The story of Mats and his avatar Ibelin is now being told in a documentary, The Remarkable Life of Ibelin. "I leave this world, and I spend most of my time in a distant world called Azeroth," begins Mats Steen in the film, his words spoken by an actor, introducing the audience to the virtual landscape familiar to players of World of Warcraft. "In there," he continues, "my chains are broken, and I can be whoever I want to be." To discover that their son, who had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, DMD, and used a wheelchair for much of his life, experienced much of what other young people his age did, socializing, friendship, love, was a revelation to his parents. "He was born more than 35 years ago now. We lived under the same roof as him for 25 years, 4 months and 15 days, Robert Steen tells the BBC. Then he died, having suffered quite severely from the disease that he was born with. And we believed that he lived a lonely and isolated life, without experiencing love or being important or making a difference in the lives of other people, because that is all we saw. The day after his passing, we inserted a small post into his blog saying he'd passed away, as we thought we ought to, since he spent so much time in the gaming world. That's when emails started to come in telling of people's strong relationships with Mats. And that was the turning point of our own life. His death was also the beginning of the story, because in the 10 years since he's passed, we've learned so much about his life. Mats Steen's double life was first explored in 2019 by Norwegian public broadcaster NRK, and then in a BBC News article, which inspired Norwegian filmmaker Benjamin Ree to tell the story as a documentary. "I think his story asks some questions that are really relevant today," he says. "Is it possible to become friends with someone you've never met? Is it possible to experience love with somebody you've never met? And how close a friendship can you have with someone you've never spoken to, just written to? And at the same time, I think it says something about the generational gap, about my generation's fascination for gaming. I'm 35 years old, and being in a virtual world. Mats really came of age within that game. Also, both Mats's friends and family have told me that towards the end of his life, he really wanted to have mattered. He seemed to have lived such a short life, but he wanted to be remembered." Ree crafted the documentary using VHS footage of the Steen family, as well as using an actor to recite parts of Steen's blog, titled Musings of Life, which was published shortly before his death in 2014. While some of his friends from World of Warcraft are interviewed, Ibelin and other avatars from the game are animated. Steen had also interacted in the game by text, not by voice, and all his communication had been stored while he was gaming. His online community, known as a guild within World of Warcraft, called Starlight, helped make around 42,000 pages of discussion and directions available to Ree, so that he could piece together Steen's inner life as Ibelin. Ree describes it as like a film script that's 42,000 pages long, which really tells the story of an actual lived avatar life during those 8 years. All of Ibelin's feelings and actions were in that archive, he says. So if Mats wrote, "Ibelin seems sincere yet saddened," we knew exactly where and when that happened, and in the film, we try to interpret the complexity of the writing and the emotion into actual animation. Just how possible is it for an online avatar to represent a real person? Mats Steen named his alter ego after Orlando Bloom's character Balian of Ibelin in Ridley Scott's 2005 historical epic Kingdom of Heaven. In the game, Ibelin is tall, muscular, and blonde, and runs through Azeroth for 30 minutes each day. He introduces himself in the documentary as Ibelin Redmore, famed detective and nobleman, who finds friends and fights evil wherever he goes, and Steen describes the character as an expansion of myself, of different parts of me. A generational divide. Ibelin Redmore may sound like an idealized superhero, perhaps because he was created by a 17-year-old. But Steen's parents received messages from other players saying that he would always lighten the mood in the game. Another tribute read, "He was there for me, and I could also talk to him about the stupid things." The film meets Xenia from Denmark and her son Mikkel, who play online as their avatars Rika and Nickmick, and she says that Steen's mature advice was essential in helping them improve their mother-son relationship. Another friend, Lisette from the Netherlands, recounts how the teenage Steen wrote a letter to her parents when they took her computer away from her as her grades were suffering, asking them to find a different solution because she was depressed. "I think she's a great person, and I consider her one of my closest friends," he had written. He was an incurable romantic and always had success with women, another friend of Ibelin's wrote to the Steens. And it was Lisette, in the form of her avatar Rumor, who seems to have been the great love of Steen's life. The two met in the game when they were around the same age as teenagers. In the documentary, Ibelin encounters a dark-haired, mysterious beauty who steals his hat. Later, they exchange a kiss on the cheek. "It was just a virtual kiss, but boy, could I feel it," Steen says about the meeting. Science experts have suggested that the human brain processes video games as if they're really happening. Although many societies are currently discussing the harm done to young people by too much smartphone and online time, Steen's father says he's reevaluated the value of his son's virtual encounters. "Mats told us he was gaming with other people, but we felt they couldn't know him as they hadn't met physically," Robert Steen says. "Yet I think if you move ahead 10 years in time, we won't even have these kinds of conversations. We'll not differentiate between the digital and physical. For younger people, digital or physical, it's all very much the same. The relationships they've established online are as important and natural as physical relationships. It's just my generation where this is strange, as we never experienced it growing up." Some of the Starlight Group attended Steen's funeral and still hold gatherings in his honor, which Ree says is proof of the real friendship that exists within gaming. "I think that amount of time these gamers spend together is much more time than I get meeting my friends in real life," he says. "The amount of time they role-play or game together, or also just talk about the serious stuff, I think there's great value in that. And I found out that Mats was great at asking the question, 'How are you doing?' and really listening to the answer afterwards." Not that the film portrays Ibelin or Steen as saint-like. As Steen's health deteriorates and he becomes more frustrated at the limitations of his physical life, Ibelin has more outbursts and lashes out at fellow players. The Steens explain that their son also created another avatar at the age of 21, called Jerome Walker, who doesn't feature in the movie. "Jerome was a cowboy. He was drinking whiskey and dancing," Robert Steen says. "He was flirting with women all the time and so on and so forth, so that was probably him mirroring the 21-year-old he became, rather than the 17-year-old who created Ibelin. But Mats was clearly using the avatar to experience things which he would have liked to in physical life. It's a good thing I'm in this wheelchair, or I'd be out giving my mother a heart attack, Mats Steen writes. Indeed, what makes the story so compelling and well-received, it won both the directing and the audience awards at the Sundance Film Festival, often a harbinger of an Oscar nomination, is the character of Mats Steen that Ibelin helps reveal. His strength, his humor, and occasionally his melancholy. In this other world, a girl wouldn't see my wheelchair or anything different. They would get my heart, soul, and mind conveniently placed in a handsome, strong body, Steen says about life in Azeroth. At high school, there were parties, attractive girls, so many things a boy of 17 years old desired, but they were all just dreams, things beyond my reach. Dreams are nice, though, in this way. You can always visit again.
2024
NFL Week 8. Biggest questions, takeaways for every game. Week 8 of the NFL season kicked off Thursday with the Los Angeles Rams handing the Minnesota Vikings their second loss of the season. On Sunday, the Detroit Lions blew out the Tennessee Titans, and QB Jameis Winston lifted Cleveland Browns past the Baltimore Ravens. Later, the Kansas City Chiefs beat the Las Vegas Raiders, moving to 7-0 on the season, and QB Jaden Daniels launched a 52-yard Hail Mary to rally the Washington Commanders past the Chicago Bears. The Pittsburgh Steelers turned in an all-around solid game in beating the New York Giants on Monday Night Football. Our NFL Nation reporters reacted to all the action, answering lingering questions coming out of each game and detailing everything else you need to know for every team. Let's get to it. Can the Steelers keep the momentum going after the bye? Monday was encouraging. The Steelers managed one offensive touchdown, but it was still as complete of a performance as the team has recorded this season. Not only did TJ Watt sack Daniel Jones and recover Jones' fumble to atone for Russell Wilson's fumble, but Wilson also built on last week's performance with another solid outing through the air. Special teams also kept its mojo going with Calvin Austin III's punt return touchdown. The Steelers are off next week, followed by a date with the Commanders. Describe the game in 2 words: complete performance. The Steelers got major contributions from every phase. On special teams, kicker Chris Boswell accounted for all of the Steelers' first half points, and Austin got the punt return touchdown. On offense, Wilson and Najee Harris kept things rolling with another solid week. And on defense, Watt came up big with a pair of sacks. Eye-popping stat: the completion probability on Wilson's touchdown pass to Austin was just 28.2%, marking Wilson's 12th touchdown pass with a completion probability less than 30% since the start of last season, per NFL Next Gen Stats. That's 4 more touchdown passes than any other QB in that span. How bad is it going to get for the 2-6 Giants? Despite playing tough in Pittsburgh, the Giants have still lost 6 of their first 8 games for the second straight season. They play the first-place Commanders next week. If the Giants don't win at home against Washington, or the following week against the lowly Carolina Panthers before their bye week, this season could spin out of control. Even though coach Brian Daboll and GM Joe Schoen got a vote of confidence from owner John Mara this past week, every game is important. Describe the game in 2 words: not enough. This had a little bit of everything: explosive plays, silly mistakes, tons of offense, but no touchdowns in the first half, a game-ending interception thrown by Jones in Steelers territory. The Giants battled to the very end with a tough Steelers team, but they were just not quite good enough in any phase of the game. Eye-popping stat: 4 illegal shift or illegal formation penalties on the Giants. That is just not acceptable. Getting flagged 6 times on their first 2 offensive possessions is also problematic. Daboll needs to get this cleaned up immediately. At 4-4 heading into the bye and the trade deadline, what do the 49ers need to make another second-half run? The 49ers got a much-needed win against Dallas to get back to .500 and put themselves right back in the thick of the NFC West division race. But the schedule only gets more difficult, which is why the Niners should once again look to make an additional 2 before the November 5th trade deadline. With running back Christian McCaffrey, Achilles tendonitis, trending toward a post-bye return, and linebacker Dre Greenlaw expected to return in the weeks that follow, the 49ers will get 2 significant additions for the stretch run. But don't be surprised if they look to add from the outside, particularly on the defensive line. Describe the game in 2 words: get right. San Francisco has owned the Cowboys of late, and their arrival to Santa Clara came at a time when the Niners needed it most. Even with Dallas coming off a bye and having a rest advantage, the 49ers always get up to play it. Including the playoffs, this is San Francisco's 4th straight victory against Dallas. Eye-popping stat: after struggling in the first half, 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy got it going in the 3rd quarter by working the underneath routes. As his air yards per attempt dropped from 9.7 in the first half to 3.9 in the 3rd quarter, his production skyrocketed. Purdy was 7 of 7 for 103 yards and a touchdown in the 3rd quarter that turned the game in San Francisco's favor. Where do the Cowboys go from here? Not even the bye week could refresh and refocus the Cowboys. 2 weeks after losing by 38 points, the Cowboys hung with the Niners for a half before dropping their first road game of the season. The Cowboys hope to have Micah Parsons, ankle, Brandon Cooks, Marshawn Kneeland, knee, and DeMarcus Lawrence, foot, back within the month. But will it matter? At 3-4, the Cowboys are 2.5 games behind the Washington Commanders and 2 games behind the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC East. The Cowboys' next 4 opponents, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Houston, and Washington, are a combined 22-9. Offensively, defensively, and now on special teams, 3 kickoff penalties Sunday, they just have too many holes. Describe the game in 2 words: Niners domination. The Cowboys have lost 4 straight to San Francisco, including 2 playoff games. They have been outscored 69-30 in the past 2 trips to Levi's Stadium. In the third quarter Sunday, the 49ers outgained the Cowboys 167-16, had 10 first downs to the Cowboys' 0, and scored 21 points. According to ESPN research, Dak Prescott is the first Cowboys quarterback with multiple interceptions in 3 straight games since Troy Aikman in 1992. Those Cowboys went on to win the Super Bowl. These Cowboys do not look like a playoff team. Biggest hole in the game plan. The Cowboys had no answers for 49ers tight end George Kittle. Certainly, it wasn't safety Donovan Wilson. He was caught in man coverage against Kittle far too often on a night when Kittle had 6 catches for 128 yards and a touchdown. He had 3 catches for at least 25 yards, the most such catches he has had in a game in his career. In the 2 previous games versus the Cowboys, including playoffs, Kittle had 3 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown, and 5 catches for 95 yards. Do the Commanders now have a good defense? Washington's defense has allowed a combined 22 points over the past 2 games and was the primary reason for the win over Chicago, despite late scores. The Bears took nearly 3 quarters to generate any offense and moved the ball better in the fourth quarter. But Washington's defense harassed Bears QB Caleb Williams all game and forced him into hurried throws. If the Commanders can continue to play solid defense, they'll be hard to beat in the NFC East. Describe the game in 2 words: Hail Mary. Washington quarterback Jaden Daniels delivered possibly the play of the year. Playing with an injured rib and against a top 5 defense, he never shied from playing his usual style. And he capped it with an unreal 52-yard Hail Mary touchdown pass to receiver Noah Brown. Biggest hole in the game plan: red zone offense. The Commanders' first 3 field goals all were within 30 yards. A false start penalty impacted one drive, and Zach Ertz failed to control a pass in the end zone. Fortunately for the Commanders, kicker Austin Seibert has been automatic. He made 4 of 5 field goals and is now 23 for 25 this season. What happened to the Bears' offense during the bye? It took the Bears 3 quarters to hit 100 yards of offense. The offense finally started to click late, despite a goal line fumble by fullback Doug Kramer. DeAndre Swift scored a 56-yard rushing touchdown to cut Washington's lead to 12-7 with 43 seconds left in the third, and Roschon Johnson barreled in from the 1 to put the Bears up 15-12 with 23 seconds left in the fourth. But the Bears' luck ran out as the Commanders won on a Hail Mary at the buzzer. Describe the game in 2 words: red zone defense. The only reason the score reflects a close game is because of how stout the Bears' D was inside the 20-yard line. Chicago's 3rd-ranked red zone defense held the Commanders to 4 field goals on 5 attempts, the last of which, a 51-yard attempt, appeared to be tipped by defensive tackle Jervon Dexter Sr. Biggest hole in the game plan: early scoring. Chicago's biggest takeaway from its bye week evaluations centered on getting off to faster starts. The Bears have scored 3 points all season on their opening drives, tied for 2nd fewest, and their 10 first-quarter points through 7 games are the 3rd fewest in the NFL. Even after acquiring DeAndre Hopkins, should the Chiefs pursue another wide receiver before the trade deadline? It wouldn't be a bad idea. Hopkins will have a bigger presence and most likely more production as the season progresses than he did in his first game with the Chiefs. But the Chiefs still don't have a lot of depth, even after Juju Smith-Schuster returns from his hamstring injury. Xavier Worthy is a rookie and hasn't been a reliable presence from down to down at this point. The Chiefs' other receivers are nice complementary players, but at crunch time, having another threat wouldn't hurt. Describe the game in 2 words: defense rules. The Chiefs' defense saved them on 2 drives early in the third quarter. The Raiders started their first drive of the period on the Chiefs' 28 and the second one on the Kansas City 3. The Raiders came away with just a field goal. The Chiefs stopped the Raiders on downs on the other drive, one of several such stops by the Kansas City defense this season. The Chiefs also forced and recovered a fumble by Las Vegas QB Gardner Minshew in the fourth quarter. Most surprising performance: Hopkins caught only 2 passes for 29 yards, but the real surprise was that he played as much as he did. He had 23 snaps, a good number for someone who didn't practice with the Chiefs until Thursday. Why can't the Raiders run the ball? What in the names of Josh Jacobs, Marcus Allen, and Bo Jackson is going on with the Raiders' lack of a running game? With 2 minutes to play against the Chiefs, Las Vegas averaged just 1.6 yards per carry, 33 yards on 21 attempts, and it was the second time this season it averaged under 2.0 yards per rush. You can't run if there are no lanes, and rookie left guard Jackson Powers Johnson had a rough go of it with Chiefs defensive tackle Chris Jones. Design or desire? Describe the game in 2 words: lost opportunities. Twice the Raiders had the ball inside the Chiefs' 5-yard line, and Las Vegas could muster only 3 points out of those chances. And with the Raiders at the Chiefs' 3-yard line late in the third quarter, 4 plays resulted in 5 lost yards. In fact, per ESPN research, the Raiders were contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage on each play. Early prediction for next week. Desmond Ridder will get a significant run in a Cincinnati homecoming of sorts for the new Raiders QB who played his college ball in the Queen City, with Aiden O'Connell on injured reserve and Gardner Minshew committing another costly turnover. His mid-fourth quarter fumble resulted in a Chiefs touchdown and was his league-leading 11th turnover. The Raiders need a spark. Ridder took the field for a designed play that was wiped out by a false start. Is rookie QB Bo Nix ready for the tough part of the schedule? Nix had 220 passing yards in the first half of Sunday's win, more than he has had in all but one game this season. He had 246 passing yards in the Broncos' Week 2 loss to the Steelers. Now, Nix moves to the thorny part of the schedule as the Broncos, 5-3, are at Baltimore and at Kansas City the next 2 weeks. Most surprising performance, the Broncos' tight ends had 17 receptions for 136 yards and no touchdowns as a group in the first 7 games. Sunday, they had 5 receptions for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half alone. Adam Troutman, whose previous career high was 58 yards, had 4 receptions for 85 yards and an eyebrow-raising one-handed touchdown grab before halftime. With Nix's struggles in the intermediate zones in the middle of the field, the Broncos have needed far more from the tight end position. Describe the game in 2 words: confidence game. Coach Sean Payton has consistently said any questions about Nix's confidence and ability to bounce back from mistakes are misplaced. Against a tepid Panthers pass rush, Payton included more things Nix is comfortable with: RPOs, rollouts, no huddle, in-breaking routes, and the rookie had his best day of the season, 4 total TDs. Coupled with another dominant performance from the defense, the Broncos should have their collective head in a good spot. Does QB Bryce Young deserve another start next week versus the Saints? Yes, but he likely won't get it because Andy Dalton will start if his thumb is good to go. Young was basically set up for failure Sunday. He was missing his top 2 receivers, Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen, because of injuries and facing the league's 4th-ranked defense. He actually looked decent on his first series, capped by a 6-yard touchdown, but quickly had to play catch-up to get away from the ball control game plan. He had no chance to win. Describe the game in 2 words: coaching meltdown. It was a 2-score game midway through the third quarter when Coach Dave Canales called a fake punt from his own 24 that didn't work. The play could have succeeded if punter Johnny Hecker's pass was decent, but Carolina still would have been about 65 yards from the end zone. Biggest hole in the game plan: pass defense. Carolina loaded up to stop the run, leaving receivers wide open. Denver rookie QB Bo Nix's 220 passing yards in the first half were more than he had in all but one game this season. The blitz didn't work. Nix was 8 of 12 in the first half for 147 yards and 2 TDs. Has Ladd McConkey established himself as the Chargers' top receiver? The Chargers traded up in the second round of the 2024 draft for performances like the one McConkey had Sunday against the Saints. He caught all 6 of his targets and finished with 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. He became the first Chargers rookie receiver with 100 receiving yards and a touchdown in a game since 2013, when Keenan Allen scored 3. QB Justin Herbert lauded McConkey in the days leading up to the game, saying that the wide receiver makes throwing the ball easy for him Sunday could be the beginning of a dominant pairing for the Chargers. Describe the game in 2 words. Receiver redemption. After last week's loss to the Cardinals, Chargers receivers gathered in the locker room and discussed being more consistent. Joshua Palmer called their performance unacceptable, and McConkey said it sucks, but they vowed to be better. They responded with season highs in receiving yards for McConkey, 111, and Palmer, 72. Biggest hole in the game plan: pass protection. Herbert was sacked 3 times Sunday. The 5th straight game he has been sacked multiple times, which is tied for the 5th longest active streak in the NFL. Herbert escaped many would-be sacks Sunday and scrambled for 49 yards. As the Chargers look to make a playoff push, protecting Herbert will be paramount. Can anything save the Saints' season? The Saints touted the return of several injured players all week, hoping it could give them a boost to stop their losing skid. But New Orleans wasn't any better against the Chargers, committing penalties, giving up big plays, and failing to move the ball. With the exception of QB Derek Carr's potential return next week, there doesn't seem to be much hope this team can turn things around. Describe the game in 2 words: anemic offense. The Saints tried to turn to QB Jake Haener late in the game after rookie Spencer Rattler failed to get anything going, but it wasn't a magic fix for New Orleans' issues. It's clear the team's problems go beyond one position, and even the return of tight end Taysom Hill and receiver Chris Olave didn't seem to inspire much change. Biggest hole in the game plan: the Saints' conservative game plan. New Orleans didn't seem to have much trust in Rattler's ability to throw downfield, as only 6 of his 24 pass attempts went 10 or more yards through the air. That didn't help move the ball in the early going, and the Saints eventually made a quarterback change. Are the Bills the best team in the AFC? The Bills are certainly in the conversation and have made a case for being the conference's top squad. With the rest of the AFC East at 2 wins, the division is the Bills for the taking. After that, there are some things for them to prove against the AFC's best. But in this lopsided win, the team's 4th 20-point win of the season, the Bills showed they can be considered among the AFC's elite. They put together a well-rounded performance in all 3 phases, turning QB Josh Allen's first interception of the season, on a play in which receiver Amari Cooper appeared to slip, into a minor note on the stat sheet, while decisively beating a team that entered Sunday atop the NFC West. Most surprising performance: run defense. The Bills did well stopping the run last week against the Titans, but this was an even better performance. The Seahawks had -1 rushing yards on 10 attempts in the first half and finished with a season-low 32 yards. They were contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage on 9 of 17 rush attempts in the game, with 7 of those coming on first down. Describe the game in 2 words: supporting Allen. This game was an example of how a strong rushing attack can support the Bills. QB as running back James Cook rushed for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cook now has 7 rushing touchdowns, the most by a Bills player in the first 8 games of a season since Travis Henry had 8 in 2003. Cook helped Buffalo extend drives and put the Bills in position to convert 8 of 14 third downs. Why are the Seahawks so up and down? A clean performance led to a 20-point road win last week over a Falcons team that had won 3 straight games, giving the Seahawks a 4-3 record and first place in the NFC West. 7 days later, the Seahawks got hammered at home amid a sloppy mess of unforced errors and missed opportunities. QB Geno Smith tripped over a teammate near the goal line for a turnover on downs at the 1, while another drive deep into Buffalo territory was thwarted by a bad snap. Seattle committed 11 penalties for 82 yards, including a roughing penalty on linebacker Derek Hall that led to a brief scuffle between defensive lineman Jaron Reed and the second-year outside linebacker. Receiver DK Metcalf, knee, didn't play, but that probably wouldn't have made much of a difference given how badly the Seahawks hurt themselves Sunday. Most surprising performance: the Seahawks got very little out of their pass rush, which did not record a single hit on Allen despite the QB dropping back 36 times. They technically had a sack, but it came on a play in which Allen fumbled while running untouched. Per ESPN research, Seattle generated pressure on just 19% of Allen's dropbacks, 7 of 36, the lowest rate Allen has faced since Week 12 last season against the Eagles, 18%. Early prediction for next week. Josh Jobe and Trey Brown will battle for snaps as the third cornerback. That will essentially be a starting role, given how often the Rams, Seattle's Week 9 opponent, use 3 receiver sets, and it'll be an important one now that receivers Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are back in the LA lineup. Jobe was up and down Sunday while playing ahead of Brown. He recorded his first career interception, but committed a retaliation penalty and allowed several completions in coverage. Can the Texans survive wideout Stefon Diggs' knee injury? The Texans are already without wideout Nico Collins' hamstring, so being down Diggs would drastically hinder the offense. The new number 1 would be Tank Dell, who had 4 catches for 35 yards and a touchdown Sunday. For an offense that's struggling to protect QB CJ Stroud, losing Diggs and Collins for another week makes life for Stroud much harder. The Jets, Houston's Week 9 opponent, rank in the top 10 in fewest passing yards allowed. Eye-popping stat. When the Texans made Colts QB Anthony Richardson drop back and pass without play action, they locked him down. Richardson went 5 of 20 for 71 yards with an interception and a passer rating of 21. Biggest hole in the game plan. The Texans know Kenyon Green is the weak link in allowing the passing attack to thrive. Green allowed 7 pressures and a sack Sunday. They benched him mid-game for CG Jarrett Patterson, but that lasted 1 drive as Patterson suffered a concussion. What's next for QB Anthony Richardson? Not all of Richardson's issues are self-inflicted, i.e., the questionable play calling, the drops from his passing targets, and the pass protection. But there is no question Richardson's lack of consistency is making it difficult for the Colts to sustain drives. He has still made just 10 starts and remains a developmental quarterback. He was better than his numbers suggested, 10 of 32 passing for 132 yards, but he'll need to show improvement for the Colts to resist pressure to consider playing veteran backup Joe Flacco. Most surprising performance. WR Michael Pittman, back, is still playing hurt, but the Colts' inability to get him going is becoming problematic. He caught 1 pass for 16 yards on Sunday on 6 targets. That's not enough production for a player who has been a volume receiver for Indianapolis and got paid accordingly this offseason. Indy badly needs to find a solution. Early prediction for next week. Richardson and the Colts offense will have their hands full with the Vikings' Brian Flores-led defense. With Richardson and an offensive line that struggled with the noise on Sunday, traveling to face a loud environment and crafty defense that is top 10 in scoring defense, Minnesota's defensive expected points added and rushing defense is concerning. How are the Packers going to beat the Lions next week? Sunday's game against the Jaguars was a struggle even before QB Jordan Love left the game with a groin injury. The Packers trailed late in the third quarter before a Malik Willis-led drive, capped by a 38-yard RB Josh Jacobs touchdown run, put them back in the lead, only to see the Jaguars tie it again late. For the second week in a row, the Packers needed a last-second field goal by Brandon McManus to win it. Meanwhile, the Lions, who come to Lambeau Field next Sunday, looked nearly unstoppable in their rout of the Titans, putting up 52 points. Most surprising performance. Willis. Maybe it should no longer be a surprise, given that Willis already won 2 starts in place of Love. But this time, he didn't have a week to prepare for it. He had a halftime talk to do so. He looked as poised as could be as he stood in the pocket and lofted a deep ball to WR Jaden Reed for a 51-yard completion on the game-winning drive. Willis was 4 of 5 for 56 yards and a touchdown, plus a key 2-yard scramble. Describe the game in 2 words. Team takeaways. That's what the Packers' defense should be known for in the first half of this season. With CB Xavier McKinney's first-half interception, his league-leading 6th of the season, plus LB Edgerrin Cooper's forced fumble that DT Devontae Wyatt recovered in the second half, the Packers now have 19 takeaways through 8 games, 1 more than they had all of last season. It's the Packers' most takeaways in the first 8 games of a season since 2011, when they also had 19. Is the Jaguars' season essentially over? They did rally from a 2-6 start to make the playoffs in 2022, but this is a much different situation. They had 6 starters leave the game with injuries, including the top 3 receivers, and face Philadelphia, Minnesota, Detroit, and Houston in their next 4 games. Now the question turns to what happens to coach Doug Patterson and GM Trent Baalke. Owner Shad Khan said he expected the playoffs this season, and their jobs may be in jeopardy, especially if they can't overcome the injuries. Describe the game in 2 words: MASH unit. The Jaguars had 6 starters leave the game with injuries, and only RG Brandon Scherf, knee, returned. The top 3 receivers went down: Christian Kirk, shoulder; Gabe Davis, shoulder; and Brian Thomas Jr., chest. Kirk's injury appeared the most serious. He went straight to locker room. LG Ezra Cleveland, ankle, and CB Ronald Darby, hip, also got hurt. Biggest hole in the game plan. Weak start on offense. The Jaguars had no points and 15 yards of offense in the first quarter, the 5th time they've put up 15 yards or less in a quarter this season. Slow starts have been a problem. They've scored just 20 first-quarter points in 8 games this season. It's easier to play from ahead than from behind. Does this win all but seal the NFC South for the Falcons? Not quite. But the Falcons have had a stranglehold on the division. Atlanta is 4-0 against its division rivals and now has 2 wins over the Bucs, the team most likely to be there at the end of the season, with the Falcons for division supremacy. Atlanta has the struggling Saints on the road in 2 weeks, and then the woeful Panthers in Week 18. There's much more football to play, but the Falcons are certainly in pole position. Eye-popping stat. Cousins has more touchdowns against the Buccaneers this season, 8, in 2 games than he does against the rest of the league, 6 in 6 games. Cousins threw for a franchise record 509 yards against Tampa Bay in Week 5. On Sunday, Cousins was the first Falcons QB with 3 touchdowns in a first half since Matt Ryan in 2020. Most surprising performance. Falcons fans and fantasy football aficionados have been waiting for a breakout game from K.L.P for a long time. It came Sunday. Pitts tied his career longest touchdown pass with a 36-yard grab, and then followed with a 49-yard TD catch to set his personal record. Can the Bucs survive without WRs? Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. QB Baker Mayfield leaned heavily on his running backs and Cade Otton, who scored 2 touchdowns. The downfield passing game wasn't there. Mayfield was intercepted twice on passes intended for WRs, Ryan Miller and Jalen McMillan, although Rakim Jarrett emerged in the second half. They could get by, dinking and dunking, until Evans returns. If the defense stops giving up so many explosive plays, but their chance at winning the division may have slipped away. Biggest hole in the game plan. The Bucs' pass defense struggled mightily defending WRs Darnell Mooney and Drake London, and K.L.P. Even worse was the pass rush's inability to get home against QB Kirk Cousins. DT CJ Brewer had the Bucs' only 2 sacks of the game. Pitts beat Carvin Merriweather on a 36-yard touchdown, and then 3 defenders missed tackles on a 49-yard score on a slant route. CB Tyrek Funderburk got beaten by Mooney on a 30-yard score. He was replaced in the second half by Josh Hayes, and RB Bijan Robinson went untouched into the end zone, going into the flat. Early prediction for next week. We could see another big week from Otton. The Chiefs were surrendering an average of 83.5 yards per game to opposing tight ends going into Week 8. That's the most given up by any team in the league. But they've also boasted one of the league's best run defenses this season, giving up just 3.8 yards per carry and 90.5 yards per game through the first 7 weeks. Did coach Jerod Mayo's criticism of the team last week work? The Patriots answered the call. They didn't play soft and, in fact, showed the mental toughness to pull out a dramatic win late in the fourth quarter. QB Jacoby Brissett took over for rookie Drake May, concussion, in the second quarter and led the team to a 12-play, 70-yard touchdown drive to put the Patriots ahead with less than 30 seconds to go. This was a big response by the team after Mayo ran the risk of possibly losing the locker room by publicly calling out his players for playing soft last week. They looked like a different team this week. Eye-popping stat, Before his injury, May reached a top speed of 20.33 mph on a 17-yard TD run, the second fastest top speed by a QB on a touchdown this season. Arizona's Kyler Murray hit 21.27. May tied for the fourth fastest time on a TD run by a quarterback over the past 5 seasons. Biggest hole in the game plan: catching the ball. Patriots WRs let the team down for most of the afternoon. Kayshon Boutte, who talked about his sure-handed approach this week, had 2 drops. Veteran Kendrick Bourne had 2 drops, while Tyquan Thornton also had a costly drop on a beautiful ball from May. Safety Jalen Hawkins also dropped a would-be pick in the fourth quarter. Can the Jets be declared the league's biggest bust of 2024? Absolutely. They began the season with Super Bowl aspirations, and now their playoff dreams are cooked at 2-6 with a 5-game losing streak. Heavily favored, the Jets came unraveled in every way possible, falling to 0-3 under interim coach Jeff Ulbrich. Owner Woody Johnson's gambit in firing Robert Saleh after only 5 games has backfired. The Jets were so unprepared that they had to burn 3 timeouts in the first quarter because the play clock was about to expire. 3 weeks ago, they had a chance to move into first place. Now they're tied for last place with the Patriots. Brutal. Most surprising performance: the Jets' defense fell apart in crunch time, allowing the Patriots to march for a 70-yard touchdown drive in the final seconds with a backup quarterback at the helm. New arrival DE Hassan Reddick made no impact whatsoever, managing only 2 pressures on 26 snaps. Star CB Sauce Gardner allowed a big play late in the game, leading to their demise. Once upon a time, the defense was a vaunted unit. Not anymore. Describe the game in 2 words: wide left. Struggling K. Greg Zuerlein might have secured a pink slip by missing a field goal and a pat, both pulled to the left. He now leads the league with 6 field goal misses. Zuerlein's shocking decline has played a key role in 3 losses. The Jets auditioned kickers 2 weeks ago. It might be time to replace Zuerlein. Is this the start of a run for Arizona? It very well should be. The way the Cardinals played in the fourth quarter to give them their first back-to-back wins of the season is the type of football needed to win another game or 2, which, with games against the Bears and Jets coming up, is possible. Arizona finally got Marvin Harrison Jr. involved throughout the game and heavily in the fourth quarter, something it had hardly done all season. When Arizona needed a stop the most, its defense held on 3rd and long late in the fourth quarter, leading to a punt, which led to Arizona's game-winning drive. Describe the game in 2 words. Hello, Marvin. Harrison had his best game since week 2, with 111 yards and a diving touchdown on 5 catches, including 38 yards in the fourth quarter. He helped the Cardinals march down the field in the fourth quarter to pull within 2, showcasing his ability to do a little of everything. Most surprising performance: a week after rushing for 101 yards and averaging 5.3 yards per carry, RB James Conner couldn't get going Sunday in Miami. He finished with 53 yards on 20 carries for a 2.7 yards per carry average. Is this a positive sign of things to come for the Dolphins' offense? The NFL's worst scoring offense put up a season-high 27 points and a season-high 377 yards in QB Tua Tagovailoa's return, but it was against a Cardinals defense allowing the 6th most yards per game. Miami looked worlds better than it did in its 4 games without Tagovailoa, but faces a bigger test next week against a Bills team that has won 12 of its past 15 games against the Dolphins. Describe the game in 2 words: Tua time. The Dolphins quarterback returned from a 4-game absence, concussion, and led his team to a season high in points and touchdowns in his first game back. He wasn't flawless, 28 of 38 for 234 yards and 1 TD, but his command of Miami's offense was at a level we simply did not see from any of the 3 quarterbacks who replaced him over the past month. Most surprising performance: Dolphins LB Chop Robinson recorded a game-high 4 quarterback pressures against the Cardinals and consistently harassed QB Kyler Murray. In 3 games without Jalen Phillips, Robinson has recorded a team-leading 12 QB pressures. He's still looking for his first sack. But the light bulb is coming on for the 2024 first-rounder. Can QB Jameis Winston provide a spark for the rest of the season? With Winston starting for the injured QB Deshaun Watson, the Browns' offense looked like a completely different unit. Cleveland reached 20 points for the first time all season and had a rhythm and flow to it that hadn't been present. Winston was on the verge of giving the ball away a few times, but provided way more good than bad as he led a game-winning drive in his first start since the 2022 season. Describe the game in 2 words: Flacco-esque magic. Winston's first game as starter was reminiscent of when Joe Flacco stepped in last year and settled the quarterback position for the Browns. It seemingly injected life into every phase of the team as the Browns pulled off one of the biggest upsets of the season. Early prediction for next week: RB Nick Chubb will record his first 100-yard game of the season. It was also a solid second game for Chubb, who provided some tough runs against one of the NFL's best run defenses. With Cleveland's offensive line getting healthier, Chubb could have a breakout game against the Chargers. How did the Ravens lose to the one-win Browns? Nothing should come as a surprise. The winning touchdown, allowed by the Ravens, a 38-yarder from Jameis Winston with 59 seconds left, was the 21st completion of 25 or more yards given up by Baltimore, which leads the NFL. This was a secondary that was missing 2 of its top cornerbacks in Marlon Humphrey, knee, and Nate Wiggins' shoulder illness, and had benched safety Marcus Williams. Plus, the Ravens have a history of playing down to their competitors' level. Before reeling off 5 straight wins, Baltimore lost to the last-place Raiders. The Ravens were due for a hiccup like this. Describe the game in 2 words: another collapse. This marked the Ravens' 8th loss when leading inside the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter since the start of the 2022 season. That's the most such losses in the NFL over that span. Finishing has been a problem for the Baltimore defense, which entered this game with the most points allowed in the fourth quarter, 84. Most surprising performance: dropped passes. The Ravens' wide receivers dropped a season-worst 3 throws from QB Lamar Jackson, all of which came on third down. Baltimore entered this game as the second most efficient offense on third downs, converting 50% of the time. On Sunday, the Ravens failed on 8 of 10 third downs, 20.0%. Can the Lions carry their momentum into the divisional showdown with the Packers? The Lions were impressive in all 3 phases, notably on special teams, where Khalif Raymond returned a punt 90 yards for a touchdown. CB Khalil Dorsey also had a 72-yard kick return as the Lions snapped their 6-game losing streak to Tennessee. It'll be hard to find a team more talented than Detroit right now, and they're showing no signs of slowing down as they enter Green Bay on a roll. Even without its second leading receiver, Jameson Williams, who was suspended for 2 games for violating the NFL's performance-enhancing substances policy, Detroit put up 35 points in the first half for the first time since 1970. Eye-popping stat: RB Jahmyr Gibbs reached a max speed of 22.03 miles per hour on his career-long 70-yard rushing touchdown in the first quarter, which is the fastest top speed any Lion has reached as a ball carrier since 2016, according to NFL Next Gen Stats. It was also the longest rushing touchdown scored at Ford Field since former Lions RB Jarvid Best rushed for an 88-yard touchdown on October 10, 2011. Most surprising performance: the Lions' offensive line. Detroit allowed veteran QB Jared Goff to get sacked 3 times in the opening quarter for the first time in his career, per ESPN research. Goff was also under pressure on 3 of his first 6 dropbacks, 50%, and he fumbled after being sacked in the first quarter, but teammate Kevin Zeitler recovered it.